Right now, your brain is doing something it does dozens of times a day. And if you don't catch it, it will quietly steal the next 10 years of your life. Whatever you're avoiding today, the workout, the project, the conversation, you've rescheduled 17 times. Your brain isn't tired, it isn't overwhelmed, it's running a con. The con has a name, the 40% rule. It's the principle used by Navy SEALs and elite ultramarathoners to describe a single deeply inconvenient truth. When your mind says you're finished, you're sitting at roughly 40% of your actual capacity. The other 60%, it's there, locked behind a biological safety mechanism your brain built to conserve energy, one it has zero intention of telling you about. And here's the part nobody talks about. The goal isn't just to access that 60%. The goal is to rewire your brain so that it craves the process of going there. So discipline stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like something you actually want. By the end of this video, you'll have the exact 3-step protocol. But first, we need to meet the thing that's been running this operation your entire life. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Because the enemy isn't your schedule, your willpower, or your discipline. It's something much older, much deeper, and far more cunning than any of those things. Somewhere inside your midbrain lives a structure that neuroscientists have informally nicknamed the governor. And its entire job description, its one reason for existing, is to stop you before things get too hard. Think of it like the speed limiter installed on a company delivery truck. The engine has more than enough horsepower to go faster, but the governor caps it because the company has decided it doesn't trust you with the full engine. Your brain made the same decision about you thousands of years ago when too hard meant you might actually die, and it has never updated the software. The moment you begin a mentally taxing task, your brain detects rising cortisol and increasing energy expenditure, and it interprets this the same way it would interpret a predator at the cave entrance. Not as an inconvenience, as a threat. So it does what any reasonable threat detection system does. It sends out distress signals. Suddenly you're exhausted. Suddenly the kitchen needs cleaning. Suddenly you have an urgent need to research the migratory patterns of hummingbirds. Here's the psychological breakthrough that changes everything. The feeling of being done is not a switch, it's a dial. And most people spend their entire lives never realizing that the dial has barely moved off zero. And every single time you listen to that signal and stop, you're not just quitting for the day. You are training your brain to treat the 40% threshold as your permanent ceiling, filing it away as the limit when it was never the limit at all. So if the governor has been quietly capping your performance this entire time, the question is, what is actually happening at a chemical level inside that wall? And more importantly, is there a way to pick the lock from the inside? When you sit down to do hard work, two chemical events happen simultaneously in your brain, and together they create what researchers call limbic friction, the scientific term for that horrible feeling of wanting to do literally anything except the thing you're supposed to be doing. First, a molecule called adenosine builds up in your system, your brain's fatigue signal, a chemical caution light that slowly turns red the longer you stay focused on anything difficult. Second, if the task is hard or boring, your dopamine levels drop. And contrary to popular belief, dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. Dopamine is the pursuit chemical. It's what makes you want to keep going, not what makes you feel good after you finish. When dopamine is high, work feels like a game you're winning. When it crashes, that same work feels like a punishment for something you don't even remember doing wrong. Most people's instinct is external dopamine, a motivational video, a sugary snack, a quick scroll to reset. But this is the trap. It produces a chemical spike followed by a crash even deeper than the one you were escaping. The 40% rule works through a different mechanism entirely. When you choose to push past that 40% mark, your brain releases noradrenaline, the chemical cousin of adrenaline, to help you handle the increased stress of staying in the game. And here's where the rewiring happens. Pair that noradrenaline surge with even a small sense of progress, and your brain begins releasing internal dopamine as a reward for the effort itself. Not the outcome, not the finish line, but the actual act of pushing through. You are making the struggle the source of the reward. But before we get to the protocol, we need to knock down a very popular piece of productivity advice. Because if you've tried a dopamine detox and it didn't stick, what I'm about to say explains exactly why. At some point in the last few years, the internet collectively decided that the solution to motivation problems was to sit in a dark room, do nothing, and wait for your brain to reset, like a router you leave unplugged on the kitchen counter. And to be fair, there is real science behind it. Removing artificial high-stimulation behaviors does allow your dopamine receptors to upregulate, become more sensitive, and lower your tolerance to cheap stimulation. That part is real. But here's what a dopamine detox cannot do. It does not teach your brain how to handle the unavoidable stress of doing something genuinely hard. A detox gives you a quieter baseline. The 40% rule gives you a stress-resilient brain. If you stop at the detox, you've solved boredom. The moment things get genuinely difficult, you'll still hit the wall, because your brain has learned to handle silence, not adversity. Those are two completely different skills. If you're enjoying this content, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss our videos. High-performance psychology draws a sharp line here between a reset brain and a calibrated brain, one that has learned through deliberate experience to associate the sensation of resistance with the incoming reward of pushing through it. Think of a marathoner who has trained specifically for the wall at mile 20. They don't dread it. They've run through it enough times to know what lives on the other side. So the wall becomes a signal, not a stop sign. A dopamine detox teaches you what silence sounds like. The 40% rule teaches you what winning feels like from the inside, and then rewires your brain to chase that feeling every time you sit down to work. Which brings us to the part of this video that actually changes your behavior. 3 specific steps that turn the 40% rule from an interesting concept into something that runs automatically in your daily life. Understanding the 40% rule intellectually will do almost nothing for you. Your brain does not rewire itself through comprehension. It rewires through repetition of behavior under stress. So here is the exact protocol. Step 1 is what neuroscientists call the 10-minute friction window. The governor is always loudest in the first 10 minutes of a hard task, when limbic friction peaks and your brain is throwing every distraction it has at you simultaneously.
Your phone. Don't do it.
To bypass it, you do not commit to the full task. You tell yourself one thing only: I am fighting the governor for exactly 10 minutes. By shrinking the scope to something the brain cannot panic about, you slip past the alarm, and momentum usually carries you well beyond those 10 minutes before your brain notices. Step 2 is naming the governor's voice. When the thought arrives, I can't do anymore, I'm completely finished, I genuinely need a break, you stop and say, that is my 40% alarm going off. That one move works because naming a mental pattern activates the prefrontal cortex, creating a measurable psychological gap between the feeling of fatigue and the action of quitting. You're inserting a moment of deliberate choice into what used to be a completely automatic response. Step 3 is incremental pushing, and this one physically changes the structure of your brain over time. When you hit the wall, you don't power through for hours, you commit to 5 more minutes. Reassess. 5 more. Every time you push past the point where your brain said stop, you are physically thickening the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, the region neuroscientists have identified as the brain's willpower muscle, which is measurably larger in people who routinely do things they don't feel like doing. The 40% rule is the gym where this muscle is built. Now there's one final piece of this equation, the 48-hour integration window that determines whether any of this actually changes your default behavior or just becomes another video you watched. Knowledge without action inside 48 hours has a near zero retention rate. This is not motivational language. It is how memory consolidation works. your brain prunes unused information ruthlessly and fast. So here's your exact assignment, and I want you to take it seriously. Pick one task you have been avoiding, a workout, a difficult work project, a creative task that keeps getting pushed back. Set a timer. Work until the exact second your brain sends the signal. Okay, that's enough for today. I've given what I have. Stop. Mark that moment, because that is your 40% mark. Now commit to exactly 15 more minutes. Not 14, not 16, exactly 15. The specificity matters because it gives your logical brain a concrete, finite target to execute while the governor is still screaming at you to stop. During those 15 minutes, you will feel the discomfort. You'll feel the fog, the restlessness, the creeping urgency to check something, anything. But underneath all of that, if you actually pay attention, you will feel something else entirely. A cold, quiet sense of control that you didn't know you had access to. When the timer ends, notice how you feel. Not more drained, more awake. That sensation is the internal dopamine release that comes from proving the governor wrong. And the more times you stack that experience, the more your brain begins to anticipate it. This is how identity shifts actually happen. Not through affirmations, vision boards, or motivational quotes at 6 a.m., but through accumulated evidence. Every time you push past the governor, you file a new data point that says, I am someone who does hard things. And eventually, your brain stops fighting you because the record has spoken. Which brings us to the most important question this entire video has been quietly building toward. Not just how to do hard things, but who you become when you permanently stop letting the governor decide how far you go. Most people live their entire lives at 40%. Not because they're lazy, not because they lack talent, not because the circumstances weren't right, but because no one ever told them that the feeling of being done was negotiable. They stop when they're uncomfortable. They quit when they're confused. They retire quietly from their own potential, one small surrender at a time.
Too uncomfortable, too confused, too tired.
The people who change their own lives are not the ones who felt less resistance. They're the ones who discovered, through actual practice, that the wall is not a wall. It is a hallucination, a sophisticated, neurochemically convincing hallucination, but a hallucination nonetheless. The 40% rule does not make hard things easy. What it does is something far more valuable. It reframes difficulty as a signal that something important is happening, evidence that the willpower muscle is thickening, and the neural architecture of someone who finishes what they start is being quietly, irreversibly built. You do not need more motivation. You do not need a better morning routine. You do not need to wait until you feel ready. Because readiness, like the feeling of being done, is just another dial your brain controls and has been quietly misrepresenting to you for years. The governor is not your enemy. It's an outdated employee, hired for a world that no longer exists, doing a job that no longer serves you, and it is well past time for a performance review. So here's what I want you to do right now. Go find your wall today, your actual 40% mark, and then give it 15 more minutes. Drop a comment below with the one task you're applying this to. And if this shifted something for you, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our videos.